start with basically how you entered into this project, because I think this is, I think, pretty relevant. And then I want to unpack a lot of what you just said, ranging from the ideological biases and how those ratings manifest that ideology, and then I want to get into the sort of the input versus the importance of inputs as opposed to measuring outputs, or at least keeping the relationship there. But start with how you got into this.
Let me tell you how it all started. Yeah, exactly. So I live in Somerville, Massachusetts, which for those who don't know is, for all intents and purposes, a neighborhood of Boston. Highly diverse, large immigrant population, something like 80 languages spoken in the city. And when I went on the Boston Globe to fool around with one of its web tools, clickbaity type tool designed to tell you the best place to live, and all I wanted was for it to tell me, I made a good decision. You should be living in Somerville, Jack. You're going to be really happy there. And it kept telling me to move to the suburbs, and that's not what I wanted to do. I couldn't figure out what was going on there until I finally dropped my concern with school quality to zero. And it said, oh, well, if you don't care about schools, go ahead and live in Somerville. And I thought, wow, this is really weird. I wonder what the rating is based on. And so I am a professor of education. I do this for a living. So I looked at the methodology, and they were using SAT scores, which are even worse than state standardized test scores in terms of measuring school quality. And so I did what any engaged scholar does. I started sending really angry tweets at the Boston Globe, and to my chagrin, they replied and said, have you got a better idea? So I got sucked into a project working for free for them for a few months, where all we just looked at less crazy state data and built it into a tool that, was just sort of less dangerous and foolish in terms of the presentation of data. And lo and behold, Somerville schools actually look pretty good. And we were just relying on state data. But of course, this led to broader conversations where people, unfortunately, the Boston Globe called it the dream school finder. So that put me on the hook. People kept saying, you think this is like the perfect way to find your dream school? I said, no, actually, my original name for this tool was the less crappy use of state data tool. But obviously the Globe didn't go with that. Not as catchy, right? So these conversations led to actually a conversation with the mayor of Somerville, as well as with the superintendent at the time, who said, if you were interested in trying to put together some sort of better rating system, a better measure of school quality, what would it take? And I said, the very first thing that we would have to do is actually figure out what we care about. Let's get all the stakeholders together, and let's decide what we value, right? Because nobody begins by saying, what do I care about for my kid? I only want the school to have high standardized test scores, even if those measured learning, which they actually don't really, that isn't the sole thing that people would say. So we met with teachers and parents.
All right, so wait, hold on one second. Let me just ask you this, Jack. So the data the state has, because I think this stuff is also instructive for a whole host of public policy issues, that very often we have maybe an arbitrary, or maybe this was an arbitrary compilation of data that makes all sorts of assumptions, like you're saying, because you can't do anything but other than, use that data to create. And so what data you choose to measure automatically locks you in to a certain assumptions that you may not be aware are being made about what is supposed to be important. And then you produce, you start working with this data, and it comes up with results that then sort of like skip the initial part and just move to sort of like the broader categories. So
that's a nice way of putting it.
So, all right. So tell us do you have a sense of what data was being compiled by the state, and why? Was it just arbitrary, or was it, sort of irrelevant? And let's just go to step one, which is what are the important values we seek out of a school, and then how will we get data to measure that?
Sure. Yeah. So, the main thing, there are two key explanations for why the state collects data on what it collects. data on. The first is ease, right? This is a huge enterprise. Massachusetts is a tiny state, but we've got 1 million students. So what is easy to get? We can easily get the enrollment at the school, for instance. Attendance is a little more complicated. We can get that. We can get students to sit down for an externally developed machine-scored multiple-choice test. All right, that's relatively easy. We can get a lot of easy things. Then there's also the historical piece to keep in mind, which is that people are just used to standardized testing. Standardized tests have been around for 150 years, in fact. The very first standardized test was given in Boston. And so the fact that people are used to it makes people less likely to be skeptical, right? If there wasn't this history of standardized testing and you dropped down a Scantron multiple choice test in front of students, they'd look at you like you were nuts, and they'd go home and they'd tell their parents about it, and their parents would be outraged that this was how you were going to try to measure what their kids had learned that year. This is not the only way that we can try to measure student learning, and there are a whole host of other measures that we would probably like to have in order to figure out how's the school doing, what's life there like. So to answer your second question, what do people care about? We've organized a school quality framework into 5 major categories, and these represent what basically everybody really cares about. And by everybody, I mean not just parents and community members, but the students themselves. We ran focus groups where we included students, and then also teachers, district administrators, principals. And what do they care about? They care about teachers and the teaching environment. They care about school culture. They care about a school's resources. They care about the academic learning that happens at a school, and then they care about these character and citizenship and well-being outcomes at a school. And so with a lot of that stuff, there actually is a relatively easy way to get the information. You just have to ask the people who spend 180 days inside the building. Teachers and students. A well-designed survey can actually get a lot of that. It just happens to be that policymakers historically have distrusted teachers, have not seen teachers as being a part of the policymaking process. But
why would you consider teachers to be part of this process when they're actually the ones who bridge the entire thing, to put the whole thing together? I mean, it's just absurd. Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos